everyone, this is Outstar, and I'm super happy to share with you that Rik has sent me the answers to the Q&A. He did a marvelous job answering to most of your questions, at least all of them that he could have answered. And there might be some repeated information as some of the questions were similar and Rik really wanted to cover most of them, if not all of them. But I've decided that I don't want to cut anything from this video. You guys are going to get the full length of the interview, all of the recordings that Rik has sent me. Because I do believe it's the first time that Rik is actually doing an audio interview, and I do believe that you guys deserve to hear it all. In the background of this video, you will be able to hear the newly remastered tracks from Bloodlines 1 soundtrack, which are available on this beautiful vinyl that you can see on the screen right now. I will link it down below. The same soundtrack is also available on YouTube, Spotify, and in other places, so check it out. And now, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Rik Schaffer.
Josh Noble asks, did you do any voiceovers for any characters in Bloodlines 2? And the answer to that is no, I've never voiced any characters on any game. Next question, Urbarin Shamu, is that right? Urbarin Shamu. He asks if I played Bloodlines or Redemption. Are you talking about the video games or the role-playing games? Because obviously I played Bloodlines because I watched a lot of it as I was working on it. I have not played Redemption, and I purposely didn't even want to hear the soundtrack. It might be really good, I've never heard it to this day. I just didn't want to be influenced by anything. And I was given a lot of the books and stuff from White Wolf early on for reference, so I'm familiar with those, but hope that answers your question. R.S. Alkin asks which song's my favorite, which best explains my emotional struggle. I mentioned it before, but I'll elaborate maybe with another tune as well here. So Hollywood Theme obviously is my favorite, but I really like Chinatown theme, how that's kind of held up over the years. I just moved to an apartment, had a little studio in the back. My girlfriend at the time, who became my wife, Margaret Tang, who's the voice director, we just started living together. It was a good time. Things were starting to turn around for me, and I remember writing that in the back room there of our apartment. So anytime I hear that song, I think about that time. It was a romantic period for me, and I was really feeling good about where my life was going. And that song just has a lot of beautiful things to it. So that would be the other one that I love as well. Jay Beatty asks, what fellow music or musicians inspires you to do such music for the gaming community? I kind of touched upon my influences in an earlier question, but there aren't any really other game composers that I listen to. I mean, I've heard a lot of game scores, but I don't really get inspired or influenced by any of that. And I'm not saying that trying to be a snob. It gets to a point as a composer, if you do it long enough and you love what you're doing, you just kind of only really care about your own music. Having said that, I have clients and they always have things they send me that they, we want to like this or that. Vampire was different because Troika loved my stuff, and the producer at Activision that got me on the job, they loved it, so I didn't really have to worry about being anything but myself. There's been a very few games like that. Dark Age of Camelot was another one that I was able to just do what I wanted, and that was great. I'm not really influenced by a lot right now, just my own stuff at this point. Capitan Marmoda asks, this is so important, how can I compose vampire music like you? I have always loved the track in Vesuvius Club. I always wanted to find or make music essential and cool like that. Well, I would say first of all, just, you have to hear music in your head first. I mean, do you hear music? Does it come to you out of nowhere? Can you write melodies in your head? Because that's really where it starts. If you have that, you can learn the rest. But if you don't, most likely you're never going to be a composer. I don't know what your main instrument is, whether it's guitar or bass or keyboards. Just piano is probably a better instrument if you're going to compose and score music for film and games. But whatever you're in, you can do it on guitar too. Whatever your instrument is, I would just play and practice and try to find your own voice. Question for Rik from Division of Labor. Ever think about making badass goth EDM? I have thought about that. There's a friend of mine that is pretty awesome and known composer in that field who asked me to collaborate on something. So that has been talked about and may come to fruition in the future. Stay tuned. Lensman asks, will we see or hear the return of the Dead by Night radio show? If so, will the same voice actors reprise the role? I can't talk much about Bloodlines 2, the game, but surprises are on the way, I'm sure. Tomorrow Barrios asks, if I were a vampire, what clan would I join? I think the only ones that would have me would be the Malkavians. Fangs asks, what musicians, bands influenced and inspired me back when I was working on Bloodlines 1 soundtrack? And then down further in the thread, he mentions Massive Attack for sure. Well, not for sure. I wasn't into Massive Attack. I'd heard Angel, but I'd never bought any of their records. I didn't own Mezzanine. At the time, let's see, what was I listening to? Jerry Goldsmith, the Omen score, incredible. Planet of the Apes, amazing. I liked the Fight Club soundtrack a lot. That was cool when that came out. Some of the DJs, what they're doing, Uncle, Boards of Canada, Failure, I like them, and early U2, very early U2, and Pink Floyd and The Cure. As far as Vesuvius, some people have referenced bands like Portishead. I liked Portishead, but they weren't like a huge influence. But I can hear the similarity sometimes. People saying that song and trip hop in general. There was a time where I was listening to Tricky and that kind of stuff. So there's all kinds of various things that were going through my psyche at the time. But at the time, I had also really had found myself over the years as a composer. So I really was not trying to emulate anything. I was just trying to write from my heart the best things I could write. And the instrument I was writing the most with at the time was a detuned 7-string guitar, and not in some nu metal way, which that stuff was going on at the time. I despised that music. But how I could detune a 7-string in an interesting way with interesting tunings. And so that is kind of how Hollywood Theme came about, as well as some of the other compositions for Bloodlines started there. So hopefully that answers your question. From Midnight, Dream Collaboration, Zero Limits, Alive or Dead, who's playing what, what's the piece about? Wow, that's an interesting question. Well, Alive, I would love to have worked with Kate Bush or Tom York. Either one of those two I always thought would really do well with my music. Deceased, Jeff Buckley. How about a collaboration with Jeff Buckley and Tom York, myself, and we are scoring a David Fincher film. That would be pretty awesome. Morgan Hartnett writes, is there any song that sticks in your head in relation to a character in Bloodlines 1 and 2? Also love your work. Thank you for liking my music. I appreciate that. I wouldn't say that any song sticks in my head with respect to a specific character, but as far as what sticks in my head of being very proud of all these years later, as I said, was the Hollywood Theme, and I really like Chinatown as well. I think those have really held up well over the years, and sometimes I listen to them, and for a moment, I forget that I wrote them. I'm just kind of amazed because I just love them as the music so much, and I don't know where it came from. Some of the best artists like that. I think I wrote the original riff to Hollywood Theme in a matter of a minute, and I loved it so much I just sat there on the couch playing it over and over without expanding the composition at all for quite a while. But it just came out of nowhere, out of what I was feeling directly at the time. So those two. The next question is from Skeletron666, and it's a pretty good question and it's pretty in-depth, so I'm going to read it and then I'll get into it because this is also kind of touched upon from other people's questions. So question to Rik would be, he has said he was depressed when he made songs for Bloodlines 1 and couldn't make music after that. Not that great at least. So now he's making music for Bloodlines 2, so how's that going? What is the process of creation in general? Where does he start? Okay, so where I start first is I just happen to hear something in my head most of the time. This doesn't apply for like really ambient droney pieces, but in general, I'll hear a guitar line or a piano piece in my head. Sometimes it could be in a dream. I've had that happen before. Sometimes I'm driving. I'm like, shit, I gotta get home. I gotta find this piece of music before I lose it. And sometimes I'll try to sing it into a voice recorder, so I don't. But that rarely works for me because I'm not a very good singer, and better just to get to the instruments as soon as possible and try to find it. I'm self-taught. I don't read music. I don't even know chords that well, which, by the way, can be an issue if you're trying to score music for a living. I do suggest that you learn a bit of theory, just, a bit. I know it's boring, but... So anyway, self-taught, so I have to find it on the guitar or the piano, and that's how it starts. And once I have found that riff or that melody line or that progression or whatever, I'll record it and I'll just start flushing it out from there. That's how most of the songs were created. Like some of the ones that were more ambient and more droney, like Disturbed and Twisted, stuff like that, those were created differently, obviously. You don't really sing a drone in your head. That was a lot of experimentation. And I will say one other thing about writing music. Go with what comes to you naturally. Don't worry about trying to be somebody else. Skeletron 666. He had said he was depressed when he made songs for Bloodlines 1. So yeah, when I composed the music for Bloodlines 1, I was in a dark, very dark period of my life. It was about to turn around and get a lot better, but I didn't know that at the time. I just had a serious drug problem that didn't start out serious, but got serious over the years from being in bands and touring and that whole lifestyle. You know, I had just gone through rehab and a stint in jail, and I just recently got sober, which was, you know, tough to do, but I managed to do it. And I found myself coming out of jail, and I was broke. I was living in my car at the time. I had about maybe $10, $15 to my name, and I was first living in my car for about a week or so. I contacted a friend of mine who was a drummer in a band. I knew he had an apartment in Hollywood. I was going to go there and try to, you know, live with him. I knew he would take me in, but when I got to his house, he was gone on a job. So I had to sleep on the street for about a week in my car. That was tough. And then he got home and he let me stay with him, and I lived on his couch for a while, and I just started rebuilding everything. And I would just sit on that couch all day and write music and just slowly getting out of the hell I put myself in. I had maybe 15, 20 parking tickets. I had just broken relationships, everything. Somebody who was a drug addict, all the damage you can imagine I had, and I was repairing it all. And by the way, I've been sober now for decades, but at the time it was tough. So that music came out of that dark period. I think the first time I put my guitar on, I wrote the Hollywood theme that night. And we recorded it just a few days later. My friend had a studio downtown, and I went down, I plugged into some amps, and we recorded it. I think it was 2 takes, and then I did some overdubs with a lot of the strange, guitar sounds you hear. Everything on that was just guitar and drums. That really is my favorite song because it really encapsulated what I was going through. I heard it in my head, and my fingers just found it quickly, and I just played it over and over, and it was soothing. And somehow it was sad and dark, but it was hopeful, and I just felt I was onto something. I liked it, which is always what I judge my music on. Is it something I like? Is something moves me? And it did. Benjamin Pratt writes, if given the opportunity, would you write more songs and music for other games of the World of Darkness? If so, which species? Yeah, I mean, I would love to. If it's a cool game and with a good developer making it, I would love to. Werewolves are cool, vampires. My music tends to fit well with dark subject matter. So if it was the right opportunity, and I was feeling so inspired, sure. J. Victor Mastronardi writes, do you get goosebumps when you listen to the Bloodlines main theme? I still do. Thank you for this. We needed it. Thank you for that comment. I get proud of it when I hear all the songs, but the one that gives me the goosebumps the most are like Hollywood theme and Chinatown. But I do really like the theme. I like the new version of the theme even more. But when I hear it, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of both of them. Posh Croc writes, is the new game setting in Seattle going to have any influence on the soundtrack? Is Rik hoping to recapture the magic of the first game's soundtrack or try something different? Well, everything I do kind of sounds like me, and I really like what Bloodlines sounds like. If I try to do something, somewhere too different, it wouldn't be me. And there's a lot of inspiration in the new game. I mean, yes, it's set in Seattle. I can't really talk about it, but there's a lot of great things about the new game that were inspiring. And I believe that the soundtrack recaptures the magic, but it recaptures its own magic, but it sits nicely as a continuation from the first soundtrack, in my opinion. I think the tracks are great. Really happy with it. I spent a long time on this one as well, so we will see. Antonio Rodriguez asks, what was your initial reaction when you were approached to work on Bloodlines 2? How did you get back in the mood of the game to recapture the same atmosphere? Well, first of all, whatever I write is going to sound like me. For better or worse, I have a style and a sound. My initial reaction was I was overwhelmed, excited, surprised. I was pretty sure they were never going to ever make another Bloodlines game and no sequel. It had been so many years, I'd kind of lost hope on that. So when we got the call from Hardsuit and Paradox, I was excited, really excited. And in order to get into the frame of mind and mood, yeah, it was tough because obviously I'd been going through a lot when I wrote the first one. It was over a decade earlier. I was a different person and it was a tough point in my life. But there's always something to inspire you. And for me, I had just lost both of my parents. So that was a source of melancholy and inspiration for me. to channel my thoughts about them and some of the sadness and the beauty of them as people, as my parents. And I started with the title track to write a more mature cinematic version of it. So starting with something familiar like that really helped me to get into the feel of the game again. And it wasn't something that happened overnight, but I just kept writing each day, and slowly I came up with some really cool ideas. There's some great new music on the new soundtrack. I can't say anything more than that, but there's some fantastic pieces. I believe as good as anything I've written, and if people like what I did for Bloodlines 1, I think they're really going to like the sequel as well. Midnight writes, to Rik, dream collaboration, Zero Limits, Alive or Dead, who's playing what? What's the piece about? How about Alive, Tom York, the piece about whatever he wants to write about? That would be a great collaboration. Or Kate Bush. Deceased, Jeff Buckley, I would have loved to have worked with him. If we were doing a rock band, Chris Cornell and myself and John Bonham and John Antwis, that would be pretty incredible. But dream collaboration, Tom York, Kate Bush, my music, their lyrics, scoring a David Fincher film. Patrick Foer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. He asked, how did I become involved in the production of the original Bloodlines? Did you know somebody who brought you on board, or was it an opportunity you actually sought out? So it was a little both, actually. What happened was I was working on a game called Minority Report, based on the movie, and we were primarily handling the voiceover. But I had heard there was a vampire game being made, and I was really excited about that. I thought my music style would be perfect for that. So I asked the producer of Minority Report if he could get me in touch with the exec producer of Bloodlines. And they liked the music, and I met Troika, and they liked me, and I played them some things, and they were excited about what they heard, and that's how it started. And Troika could not have been a better developer to work with. Great guys who let me do what I wanted to do. There was almost no input from them other than, yeah, I like this, hey, can you make it a little bit more aggressive, this song, or can it be a little bit more ambient here? Other than that, there wasn't much. The only two direction points I remember were, we like the title track placeholder we have of Massive Attack's Angel, can you do something kind of like that? And then the request of wanting a Old World Transylvania vampire composition, which is how Moldy Old World was inspired. But it was definitely the best project I had ever worked on. Until Bloodlines 2, which has also been a great experience. Otto Thielemann writes, a long time has passed between the first Bloodlines game and the second one. How have you changed as an artist, and how did it affect your music? Well, for one thing, I have children now, which really changes your life. I also got clean and sober. So a lot changed in a way where I just became a much happier person, a much healthier person, and had a family. And that obviously affects the music, but there was still a lot to write about. I mean, Bloodlines 2 was written during a very deep and depressing and sorrowful time in my life, but along Bloodlines 2, both my parents died, and not too far apart. So that hit me pretty hard. So I would think about them often when I was writing Bloodlines 2 and use that for emotional inspiration. Fire Steffer G asks, what was your inspiration in creating such an amazing collection of music? Each piece is so unique by themselves, yet they fit collectively as a whole. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. The diversity came from a lot from the game. You know, there was various factions and clans of vampires and various scenarios. There was a lot to be inspired by. And the developer wanted themes for various areas, various hubs like Hollywood and Santa Monica. But then they'd ask for things like, can you compose music for like really old world vampires? And I thought about a bunch of vampires sitting around like a table, dinner table, like in Italy, like The Godfather or something. What would that sound like, and how to do that without sounding cheesy? And I wanted to use, old world instruments like accordions and things, very Italian, but not come off cheesy. And that was really challenging. And that one came out pretty cool, pretty haunting. So that's where Moldy Old World, that was the inspiration for that. And I think it's also because, it's not all guitar. There's some very dark droning pieces. There's all kinds of different music, but the common thread through all of it is melancholy, I would say. And that's just kind of the way I play. I have a certain style, for better or worse. Whatever I do sounds like me, so maybe that is the common thread as well. But and some of it was luck. Chris Gray asks, the soundtrack is 100% my favorite video game soundtrack of all time, and I'd love to know what sort of virtual instruments and recording gear Rik was using around the time of the recording. First of all, thanks for it being your favorite. It does mean a lot to me, believe me. As far as what I was using during the time, this is going to bore a lot of people if you're not a musician, by the way. There was a lot of things that had just come out right before then or around that time. It was just a great time to be making music. I remember there was a program, Spectrasonic's Atmosphere, had just come out. I got an early copy of it, and so I really loved that. There was a Roland V-Synth that I used that I really dug, as well as some other keyboards at the time. I basically use an Ibanez 7-string, I'm lefty, through a Fender twin amp. My bass is a Music Man bass, and I use a Line 6 pod, bass pod, which I love. Sounds really good. Amps are Fender Twins, old Fender Twins. I have a ton of pedal effects. I think I use a Small Stone and a Small Clone together on Hollywood Theme, and the background stuff is the strange Digitech pedal I had at the time. It's called Space Station. I would record through Pro Tools. There's various plugins I would use, all kinds of different things, but I would use a theremin. You probably heard that a lot in the music. World Spirit Map at the front of that. I used music boxes. I remember playing one of those and slowing the pitch down for Disturbed and Twisted. I would just experiment a lot. I make my own drones. Really enjoy doing that. There's various ways of making those, and so it's a combination of a lot of things back then as far as gear goes. Doket 2015. Doset or Doket 2015. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. She'd love to know how I came up with a new theme for Bloodlines 2, because she loves it even better than the first one. Well, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make a more mature, symphonic version of the composition, and hopefully I achieved that. I like it too a lot. So that's kind of what I went for, and there was just a lot of experimenting. I just hit this screaming note on the guitar, I think out of frustration, and I was recording luckily, and I loved it. It's jarring in the track, but it really does get your attention, but somehow works within the melody and the emotion of the track. There's also a delayed guitar at the very end. That was also a mistake as well. I didn't know the delay was still on, or the guitar. I thought I just set it down, and it was just making that repeated line over and over, and I loved it, so I just kind of let the song go out. Sometimes the best parts of a composition are happy accidents, and there was pieces and parts of that composition that definitely reflect that. Thank you for the question, and I do love it too. There's also a third version, by the way, with my release on Spotify. It's called Agitation Mix, and it's for the people that like the heavier version of the composition. It's an even heavier remix, so you might enjoy that too. All right, the next is from Densmian, I think that's it. He says 3 questions, but it's more like 6. I'll answer a few of them here. Sorry, there's a lot here. First off, well, he's asking, was I involved with the artist's song selection? Or did I make contact with Laguna Coil and Ministry, etc.? Did you talk to him about the game? He wants stories. So I was not involved in those licensed tracks. And I actually didn't even know about who they were getting until somebody mentioned Ministry possibly for the main theme. And Ministry, Al Jorgensen, I think he came into Activision. I wasn't there when he came in, but I heard it was kind of interesting seeing Al Jorgensen walk around Activision with his girlfriend. And he presented a track. I'm just being completely honest. I mean, I'm a Ministry fan, and I loved The Mind is a Terrible Thing to Taste and The Land of Rape and Honey. Those were cool records, and he's the best when it comes to industrial rock. But when I got the track, I was given it to integrate into the game. It pretty much was So What, if you're familiar with that song. That's what it sounded like to me, very much so. So I started to mix it, because I had all the individual sims from Al, and I was asked to mix it and try to get it, ready for the game and master it. But as I was doing that, I got a call from Activision, and they said, "What do you think of it?" And I said, "It's good. I like Ministry. It's cool. Kind of reminds me of the song So What, but I like it." And they said, "Well, would you rather we use that or your song?" Because I had written a main title theme, which is in the game now, and it's like, duh. I mean, sure, I'd love if you use mine, but that's whatever you want, whatever Troika wants, And they went with mine. They thought it fit better, and I really appreciated Troika for that. But I think it's also because they had Angel from Massive Attack in the game as a placeholder for so long that Al's maybe sounded more jarring to them than mine did. Who knows? And they used Al's song, the ministry song of the game. The rest of the bands I didn't have any contact with, although I've known, as acquaintances, I think I met the Gin and Torturers when I was in my other band during the good old days. Let's see, he asked about showing my pedal board. I don't have that pedal board anymore, but some of the pedals I used to use are ZVEX pedals. If you're familiar with those, I like those a lot. What else did I use? The Digitech Space Station, Tube Screamer for my distortion. There was a few other things, but I don't have a lot of that stuff anymore, and I've gone with plugins a lot these days, but those are some of the pedals I would use. And is there anything else here? I guess that's about it for his question. Auburn Vixen, cool icon picture. I like it. She wants to know how I went about making the new theme. How did I pick a balance between old and new? And how was it revisiting the game soundtrack after such a long time compared to the first time? So as far as the theme goes, I didn't really sit down and go, okay, I'm going to do this for the new theme. I did think that it needed to have a feel carried from the old into the new, and I wanted it to be more cinematic. So I set about trying to make it more expansive and cinematic. I plugged in my guitar, and I kind of was just, I don't know if I was angry or just fooling around, but I just bent this note up with distortion pedal on. It's in like the middle, towards the end of the song, right before you hear kind of the for a better term, Egyptian strings that come in. And that note was just so jarring. I loved it. It was like a mistake. So things like that were added, but generally just wanted to make it more cinematic, and hopefully I achieved that. I like it because I think it does sound like the game, like nothing else does out there, no other game soundtracks, but it does sound a bit different. Here we are, we're more mature. This is not your parents' Bloodlines or whatever. Anyway, hopefully that answers your question. Auburn Vixen, how was it revisiting the game soundtrack after such a long time compared to the first time? As far as revisiting, it was a long time. There was a period where I thought they were never going to make another Bloodlines. I kind of had given up hope. So when they did bring it back, I am a lot older than I was back then. The first couple of days, nothing really was coming to me that was incredible. It was exciting, and I was a little intimidated at first to try to match or beat what I had done. But once I started just getting into the world and just playing, setting the mood, lighting the candles, turning out the lights, and just playing, late at night on my guitar, on my piano, and just really absorbing myself in the imagery of the whole thing again. It started to come back in a way, and things started coming to me in my head, and I would find melodies, and it became like a familiar family member had moved back in. It was good. It was a good place to sit in my head. Although it was easier to write the first one because my life at the time was kind of difficult, and I poured it all into the music. But there's always things to be depressed about. So there's depressing things all through life, as there are beautiful things. Mel Ellis writes, which track is your personal favorite? Which was the hardest to compose, and which was the easiest? Like I mentioned in the previous question, it would have to be the Hollywood theme. It really captures what I was going through, and it seems, I'm not trying to be self-aggrandizing, but it seems to have stood the test of time. People still love it. Sometimes, if I haven't listened to it in a long time and I pop it on, like I did when I was kind of referencing the music before I did Bloodlines 2, for a second I got chills and I couldn't even believe that I wrote it, like it was me. I couldn't hear or find myself in the tune. It was just like listening to somebody else's really cool track, and that was exciting, and I was like, wow, maybe I actually wrote something timeless. Who knows? But anyway, yeah, that's my favorite. Hardest to compose and easiest. I think China Boss Battle was the easiest. I was programming on an MPC 2000 drum machine, and I culled together some really good drum hits from various sources. So I was programming a really cool drum loop. It was just in your face, and it just sounded like a cool battle. And I just let that play. So I recorded that, and it went over and over. I almost didn't want to add anything to it. It was so cool. And then I had this one sample that's almost sounded like a dial tone of a phone. I think it was originally a phone dial tone, and then I pitched it at different pitches. I assigned those to different keyboard pads, and I just, played them back and forth. So it's a very hypnotic type of thing. So there's other things to tune as well, but those were the main things. That came together pretty easily. I think one morning I did that in a few hours, just sitting there. So that was the easiest. The hardest to write, some tunes take a long time, and you come back to them after a long time. Like you'll start it and you just can't get anywhere with it, and then you just put it away and you come back. One song in particular that I remember that happened with was, and it ended up not even getting in the game. It was started for the game earlier on. It was a potential hub track, and then I just couldn't finish it at the time, and that was The Princess Dream. I was just not feeling it. That has a really solid vibe to it. So basically, that sat around for a long time, and then I queued it up one day, and I was like, oh, I forgot about this. This is really cool. And it just came to me what to play on it, and I just started jamming on it, and it came together pretty fast. So that was probably one that was harder. It sounds pretty easy. It's not a very intricate composition, but for some reason it took a long time to complete. And I just wanted to say thank you to Alstar for doing this and for the questions. I don't do a lot of interviews. I just rather just let my music speak for itself. And I'm not a person that's comfortable in the limelight. Not that I have a huge limelight, but even a cult limelight. But I want to thank all the fans of the music. It means a lot to me. I'm sure you know that by now. And I just can't believe that there's these people across the world that my music means something to them, and that they play it all the time, and it means something to them. So that means a lot to me. Thank you for making me valid as an artist.